What would happen if I told you that Hamilton's car was secretly manipulated without him knowing, just before the classification in Azerbaijan? And that this decision came from within Ferrari? What seemed a simple bad performance in Baku is actually one of the greatest technical and management scandals of the season. Today I tell you everything Ferrari doesn't want you to know. Baku, Azerbaijan. A narrow, technical and high-speed urban circuit that does not forgive errors. But it is also a layout that rewards the precision and intimate understanding of the car. And it was precisely here where Lewis Hamilton, after only 2 races with Ferrari, seemed to have finally found that necessary link with his new car, the SF25. During Friday's free training sessions, Hamilton not only marked the best times of the day, but demonstrated a very significant evolution in the way of driving the Ferrari. He adopted a more fluid style, adjusting his braking and curve entrance to adapt to the aerodynamic characteristics of the car, very different from what he handled in Mercedes. The reports of the session indicated that their car behaved in a balanced way and that the engineers had achieved a perfect commitment between peak speed and braking stability, something essential in Baku, where the very long straight lines combine with slow 90-degree curves. The comments of his surroundings were optimistic. For the first time since his arrival in Maranello, Hamilton looked comfortable, confident, almost in harmony with the car. There was even talk that this was Hamilton's best Friday since 2021. A predictable car in his behavior, with a configuration that the British had personally refined until the last detail. Each millimeter of the chassis, each differential parameter, each suspension adjustment had been calibrated with surgical precision during the day. Everything pointed to a dominant classification. But what seemed to be the prelude to a competitive rebirth became the beginning of chaos. During the night from Friday to Saturday, when the paddock was already silent, and the team had to simply check data and maintain the configuration, something that completely broke Ferrari's internal logic. In silence, without consultations, without mail to the track engineers, without communication to the pilot, a technical group known as the Central Performance Group intervened directly in the 44th car. This department, autonomous in its operation but an integral part of the Ferrari organization chart, modified fundamental parameters of the SF25, including the rear conduction height. This is not a minor change. It is one of the most sensitive elements in the dynamics of a modern F1 car. It directly affects the airflow under the car, the aerodynamic load, the traction at the exit of curves, and even the braking stability. For a pilot like Hamilton, who had built his trust during training based on a meticulous balance, this type of alteration could completely destroy his ability to anticipate car behavior. And that was exactly what happened. In Saturday's classification, the car did not respond the same. Hamilton was insecure, committing small corrections in almost all curves. The rear wheels, which the previous day delivered clean traction, now became unpredictable. Radio communication showed its frustration. The car had become an unstable machine, and the worst, without him knowing why. Telemetry data showed no failures. On the contrary, the car seemed perfect from the point of view of the sensors. And that was the detail that most baffled the track engineers. Everything indicated that it should be working well. But it wasn't. And here the suspicion was born. One of those that, in Formula One, can change races, championships, or entire pilot races. Hamilton was left out in Q2. Well, a disaster for someone who led the time back. But beyond the result, what was injured was trust. Not only in the car but in the team itself. How can you compete at the highest level if the car parameters change without explanation? Who really makes the technical decisions in Ferrari? What happened in the early hours of Saturday between free training and the classification of the Azerbaijan Grand Prix was not a simple engineering adjustment. It was a silent intervention, executed with surgical precision by a group that, paradoxically, operates inside Ferrari, but outside its race garage. A group with total access to the data, to the configuration, to the simulation models, but without paying accounts directly to the engineers who accompany the pilot every weekend. We talk about the dreaded and little transparent Central Performance Group. And here lies the problem. In Baku, this group made the decision to modify the setup of the Lewis Hamilton car without their knowledge or approval. Specifically, the rear conduction height of the SF25 was modified, a parameter that directly affects the aerodynamic behavior of the car. This height defines how much lives or lower the back of the car with respect to the asphalt, affecting the soil effect, the distribution of the low braking weight, and the way the car rests on curve. During free practices, Hamilton had found a perfect equilibrium point. His car was predictable, stable when braking, with good traction in slow outlets and adequate peak speed in Baku's lines. But by raising even only a few millimeters the rear of the car, the dynamic behavior of the SF-25 was completely modified. In practice, this means that every time Hamilton slowed down, the weight of the car moved forward later than expected, destabilizing the rear axle. Instead of having a car that adhered to the asphalt, he felt a nervous rear, which reacted with survival even in curves where he could accelerate without fear before. That loss of stability not only prevented him from trusting the car, but forced him to pilot the defensive instead of attacking. The most disturbing thing was that, when reviewing the telemetry data after the classification, everything seemed to be well. There were no failures in the sensors. There were no erratic data. The car, from a computer perspective, worked perfectly. And this made the track engineers take to understand what had really happened. But Hamilton knew it. I felt it in each curve, in each correction, in each micro-adjust that was forced to perform back after. The car was no longer the same. The level of disconnection between what the data said and what the pilot experienced generated an immediate internal crisis. For an elite Formula One team, which faces rivals such as McLaren or Red Bull in hundredths of seconds, that the pilot and its direct technical environment do not have total control over the car is unacceptable. And in this case, the modification was executed without even consulting it. A technical betrayal, if you want to call that. But this does not end there. When confronting those responsible, according to internal sources, the response of the central group was brief. The simulation suggested that this adjustment would improve the general stability in classification conditions. They did not explain why the change was not communicated. They did not justify why they ignored the pilot's feedback, who had already declared to be comfortable with the initial configuration, and much less recognized the impact that this change in the result of the session had. The Azerbaijan 2025 Grand Prix was a strategic battle from the first round. With two Ferrari pilots at points, but far from the fight for the podium, the priority of the team was simple: maximize the joint result and avoid any internal incident that could compromise the development of the season. But that intention collapsed with a single decision. As the race approached its outcome, Charles Leclerc and Lewis Hamilton were fighting for the 8th and 9th position, respectively. In an early team maneuver, Leclerc had given his position to Hamilton with the hope that the British had a better rhythm to reach Lando Norris, who rolled ahead. This tactic, usual in the leading equipment, depends on a single implicit condition. If the overtaking is not achieved, the position must be returned. But what seemed like a logical agreement became an organizational disaster that exposed the lack of coordination between the Ferrari box's wall and its pilots on the track. The communication of the team order to return the position came in the last round of the race. Not in the penultimate. Not in advance. On the last lap, with only a remaining sector in the middle of the main line, and with Leclerc a 1.5 seconds away from Hamilton. The radio message was clear but late. Charles is 1.5 seconds behind you, it's the last round, let it pass. This phrase, pronounced at a time of maximum tension, came too late to run a safe and clean maneuver. By the time Hamilton raised his foot on the straight, Leclerc was barely approaching. The exchange maneuver was not completed. Hamilton crossed the finish line only 0.464 seconds ahead of his partner. This margin, as small as lethal, ignited the spark of frustration. Leclerc, clearly annoyed by the failed execution, made brief but forceful comments by radio. His gesture when getting out of the car reflected discomfort. Hamilton, meanwhile, avoided any direct expression of discomfort, but his body language was clear. He was not satisfied with how the situation was handled from the wall. The episode ended with Hamilton adding the points of the 8th position and Leclerc with the novena. But the real price was another. The perception that Ferrari, instead of working as a united bloc, is acting as a fractured structure, without a clear leadership or a solid equipment plan. And that, in a season where each point counts, it can be the most expensive error of all. In any high-level Formula One team, the question of who makes the key technical decisions has a clear answer: the pilot and his career engineer, supported by the technical director on the track. But in Ferrari 2025, that answer has become diffuse. What happened with Lewis Hamilton in Baku, the unauthorized modification of the setup, uncovered something much deeper than a communication error. He uncovered a silent struggle of technical power within Maranello's heart. The problem becomes even more complex when there are two pilots with different profiles such as Hamilton and Leclerc, each with unique driving styles, each with a different technical team on track, but both under the surveillance of the same data center that can decide, without prior notice, what changes are implemented in their cars. And if that structure begins to make contradictory decisions with what pilots need or ask, what is generated is an atmosphere of chronic distrust.